Proceedings in former President Trump's second impeachment trial will resume today at noon. House managers are set to conclude their opening argument, with Mr. Trump's lawyers making their case by the end of the week. Both Democrats and Republicans are hoping to move ahead swiftly with the trial. So to break down what we saw yesterday and what we can expect this afternoon, let's bring in CBS News legal expert and analyst Rikki Klieman. Rikki, thanks for joining us. House impeachment managers walked the jury, the senators who experienced this traumatic event on January 6th. They walked them through the footage of the riots for several hours yesterday. Prosecutors also laid out a timeline dating back to the spring, noting that the former president laid the groundwork for claiming the election was rigged as far back as May, as soon as essentially the poll numbers started to look bad. So why is it important for House impeachment managers to lay out a timeline of all of those comments?
In order to really get to the point that the defense cannot really simply say this is the First Amendment and we only look at his words on January 6th, what the House managers, in essence, as prosecutors were doing was to say that this was a deliberate series of actions which shows intent to create the insurrection on January 6th. It shows it was inspired. It shows it was directed by Donald Trump going all the way back to the spring and summer of 2020. It was actually quite powerful because what the managers dealt with were a series of actions, because it began with the idea that Donald Trump was saying, the only way I lose this election, since he saw he was losing in the polls, is if it is rigged, if it is fraudulent. So what he does is he gins it up, and he gins it up over months, so that what the managers are saying is that he himself, singularly, alone, created this anger in his followers. And if it were not for Donald Trump, his followers would not have had this anger bottled up, going on for months on end, culminating in the insurrection or domestic terrorism, the riot of January 6th.
So, Rikki, this is the final day of the presentation by the impeachment managers. What are you expecting to hear from them?
I think the impeachment managers are going to get to the final steps, because we have dealt with, to use their phrases, the provocation and the attack, and now we have to look at the ultimate harm. The ultimate harm was started yesterday in those chilling videos, and if you could watch those videos without feeling a punch to your gut, without feeling an ache in your heart for what has happened to this country, well, then I say you have no soul. So what happened afterwards? Well, Donald Trump's actions did not end simply at the time of that video where he told people that they were special and that he loved them and that they should go home. So I think that the House managers will conclude by bringing us up, in essence, to the final moments of anything Donald Trump has said, or perhaps more important, anything Donald Trump has not said in the final days. There was really no apology. We also may learn that there was further harm, of course, that we now know about as the public who has followed this case, because you have the deaths of 5 people, plus the 2 suicides of 2 police officers. So I assume we will learn about that today as well.
So when he was running for president in 2016, Mr. Trump was sued for inciting a riot against a protester at one of his rallies. The former president won that lawsuit by relying on a case concerning the KKK, Brandenburg versus Ohio. So Mr. Trump's lawyers are using that same argument now. Democrats, however, say that in this situation, the argument misses some key points. So obviously, we know that we are not in a court of law, but there's some overlap in the concepts. This is a trial. Can you talk about the meaning of incitement and how it may have different meanings depending on the circumstances?
The case that you're referring to, back in 2016, many of us will remember seeing Trump rallies back at the time when he was running for the initial election, where he would tell his followers, if there were protesters, he would really exhort them. He would say to them, get them out of here, do something with them. And in certain cases, it was more detailed than that. But the case that you're talking about has the idea of get them out of here. And what the court found, that is the appeals court found, was that you have a perfect First Amendment right if you are not directly inciting imminent harm. So the defense of President Trump, I will expect, to say he had this First Amendment right. And of course, in the speech on January 6th, he did use the word peaceful once, as opposed to the 11 times where he said fight. And that what they are going to say is that this is simply a First Amendment right of the president to be able to speak his mind. Now, what is different here? It is an impeachment proceeding. So what we are talking about here is not about the First Amendment. What we are talking about here is the question really of an abuse of power, whether in the context of everything that led up to January 6th and ultimately to January 6th, including the claims to the very end that the election was fraudulent and the election was rigged, which was shown by courts not to be true, that what ultimately happened here was that the president, in abusing his power, abusing his oath of office to be faithful to the United States Constitution, that what he did, to use Jamie Raskin's words, was that he stopped being the commander-in-chief and he was the inciter-in-chief. So the abuse of power, as Jamie Raskin points out to the jurors who are the senators, is really a look at, was this appropriate conduct for the President of the United States? Or, as Mr. Raskin says, if this is not a high crime and misdemeanor, I don't know what is. Now, while saying that, if you look at a criminal court, should there be, at some point in time, a criminal case against Donald Trump, that First Amendment defense will come up again. But that's a different context. That's a criminal statute. Here, we're dealing with presidential power, high crimes, misdemeanors, impeachment.
All right, Rikki, so let me ask you about this. Lead House impeachment manager, Congressman Jamie Raskin, opened the second day of the impeachment proceedings by rejecting the defense's argument that the former president's remarks at the rally preceding the attacks are protected by the First Amendment. I want to play some of what he had to say.
This case is much worse than someone who falsely shouts fire in a crowded theater. It's more like a case where the town fire chief, who's paid to put out fires, sends a mob not to yell fire in a crowded theater, but to actually set the theater on fire. And who then, when the fire alarms go off and the calls start flooding into the fire department, asking for help, does nothing but sit back, encourage the mob to continue its rampage, and watch the fire spread on TV with glee and delight.
I find it endlessly fascinating, Rikki, that the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States is just constantly being scrutinized and constantly, there's so much nuance to it that it feels often that we can never fully understand it the way we can, for example, the Third Amendment, which nobody ever talks about. So what do you make of Congressman Raskin's argument?
I think that Congressman Raskin's argument is spot on. What Congressman Raskin is saying is, let's look not only at the conduct and the words of the former president, Donald Trump, leading up to the people marching on the Capitol, which then turns into a riot and an insurrection. Let's look at his conduct while this insurrection is happening, and let's look at his conduct as people's lives are being put in danger. Police officers are being tortured and beaten. What does Donald Trump do? He sits and watches. He is implored by allies, that's part of the manager's evidence, to stop this happening, that he and only he had the ability to put this to an end. He could tweet, he could speak, he could do a video. For heaven's sake, he could have gone to the Capitol. There are all kinds of things that he could have done to stop this insurrection, just like the fire chief in Jamie Raskin's example would sit back and just watch the fire blaze. You are right, Vlad. The First Amendment is, in fact, nuanced. That's why there's litigation about it all the time. We do not want to stifle free speech, but we don't want to encourage speech. We don't want to protect speech that is directed to and, in fact, incites imminent violence. And that's what happened here. That's what the House managers are attempting to show. And what you see, especially for someone like Donald Trump, who absolutely cloaked himself in the mantle of law and order, who cloaked himself with his love and appreciation for our law enforcement forces, he's watching on TV, as we all were, or many of us were, during that terrible day. And we're seeing what is happening to these police officers. What was shown yesterday, and you know that it hurt my heart as someone who is married to a police professional, that to watch the torture of these officers and the graphic display of the one police officer who is literally being crushed, that if anyone can watch that without having a second thought that someone should have stopped it, and the only person who could have stopped it is Donald Trump, and that's what the House managers are talking about.
Yeah, that's so true. I can hear his screams in my head. So, Rikki, before we let you go, though, the president's defense is going to start up. The expectation is they will start their arguments on Friday. So they are going second. And we saw, you know, during the first day of arguments, going second for them turned out to be not so good. They were caught off guard by the emotional impact of the impeachment manager's arguments. They reshuffled the deck. They came out with this really weak presentation. But this is a little different now. Will going second perhaps help them? Maybe because they'll have the final word. Maybe there'll be some distance between what they are saying and the shocking video that we all saw yesterday.
And can I just add to Anne-Marie's question, Rikki? Do jurors, in your experience, are they more apt to go with the last thing that they heard when they're deciding in a case? In other words, you can present a strong case, but you know, whoever spoke to you last, that seems to resonate or stick with you.
That's what lingers.
Huh?
Yeah, that's what lingers.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a basic law of rhetoric that talks about primacy and recency. What you hear first and what you heard last are what you most remember. It's why in jurisdictions where there is the possibility of final argument where you could get rebuttal, the prosecution or the plaintiff always wants rebuttal because you are the last word. It is really critically important in any trial, but particularly in the impeachment case. Because if there are Republicans who are looking for a reason to acquit, if that is their goal and they want to be able to go outside and hold their heads high and speak to the cameras and explain why they acquitted instead of convicted, they want something to hang their hat on. So the last speaker, being the people who are defending Donald Trump, have the ability, if they exercise it wisely, to get rid of the memory of all of that emotion that happened at this point in time, and then to get to a point of reasoning that is clear and concise that will allow Republicans to be able to say, see, all those rioters, those insurrectionists, what happened was terrible, but it was not incited by former President Donald Trump. And or the president, former President Donald Trump, had a right to say what he said, and that by saying it and coupling it with words about being peaceful, that there was never any intent or any direction to incite this act of domestic terrorism. That's going to be the tact, or should be the tact, if you're a good lawyer representing President Trump. And what it really does is it gives those Republicans an excuse.
You know, at the end of the day, what I keep thinking about is the Republicans will continue, as they do in front of the television cameras, to argue the process. You've heard some of them, for example, Senator Josh Hawley say, while he is moved by the video that he's seeing, while he, his heart goes out to the police officers and their families, especially of the ones who have died, that he believes that there's no jurisdiction here with the Senate, that this trial proceeding is unconstitutional. So that's where he stands. But at the end of the day, there are many presidents in American history who we cannot name not even one of their accomplishments or one of their failures. And what I keep thinking about is, for this president, there will only be this. It doesn't matter, because there's so much evidence here, there's so much video evidence, that it will be hard for others to remember the other things that President Trump accomplished, whether they were good or bad, when you have all this video evidence that's being presented in this second impeachment trial. And more importantly, these senators and how they vote will also, I've been saying this all week, that will also linger long past any of their accomplishments that they got done for their particular states. Their vote on this impeachment is what I think will be their legacy. So we'll have to see what happens when they do vote. Rikki, always great to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.